Firstly, I'd like to welcome Criona from Capella Workplace Solutions. Criona has a background in office design as well as a passion for wellbeing in the workplace, and she runs Capella, which supports employers in ensuring their staff have an optimum setup when working from home. Capella are experts in employee engagement as well, and have partnered with many organizations in the last year to deliver technology solutions around training in ergonomics and well-being and wellness at home, as well as aiding organizations manage the seamless return to the office. So welcome, Criona. And we'll also have Michelle Fogarty, who's the co-founder and COO of PepTalk, which is an award-winning workplace culture and wellbeing action platform. Basically, in a nutshell, PepTalk technology connects employees in a wellbeing hub controlled by the employer. Michelle is a former international athlete and has over 15 years experience in top-tier organizations from a human capital experience, including supporting a number of high-profile startups such as Twitter, Blizzard Entertainment, and also working with B&Q. So very, very, very pleased to have Michelle and Criona with us today. And finally, I'll welcome Ilse White from Learnovate back to the stage. So thank you, everyone. We'll begin the panel discussion with a question that came through from on the chat, and the question is, what is the one piece of practical advice that you'd give an employer about improving employee well-being? And I'll maybe start with yourself, Criona.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Frank. I suppose, from our point of view, we're the very practical side of employee well-being. And I would say that when everyone kind of went home a year and a half ago, they landed where they landed, and businesses tried to do their best for their employees. A year and a half nearly on, it's no longer acceptable to kind of procrastinate around this. And my practical advice would be to start moving forward on actually building a policy around this, the holistic policy that Ilse is talking about. And from our point of view, that means actually putting a plan in place to make sure that employees are set up right while they're working from home, they're safe and they're well, and the return to the office is planned for, and maybe use these few months to learn about what hybrid working means for your office and plan properly. So my advice is practically to start. Don't procrastinate and don't get overwhelmed. Just start.
Cool. Thanks a million for that, Criona. Michelle, what would your one piece of advice be?
Yeah, well, awesome. I'm fully aligned with Criona. So if we can start with the start, and once we get started, I think that the most critical piece, not just as someone who runs an organization, but like from my years of being a HR director and a head of HR, is I think it would be to focus on, I suppose, outside of the bigger piece about what well-being can do from your organization, but it's like what actually brings about real behavioral change. Because all the research shows us is that like there's not a lack of well-being for a lack of, I'm going to just say, content, right? And I mean that in a very generic sense, right? Like we're real good at giving people stuff and sending them on training courses and, you know, running programs and initiatives and all that kind of good stuff. And Ilse did a really great nod to that, but there's not a lack of well-being for that. It actually is. And I think we can probably all relate to it on an individual level, as well as then the roll up of that to an organization level, which is like what actually gets us to either remove something or implement something and keep that habit going. That is, for me, the greatest challenge that employers face. And I think that we have to think about that. And sorry, just to amend or to add on to that, is we have to think about that not just on the individual level, right? Which is like, so to Ilse's point, like how do we make our people more resilient? Or how do we help our people to not be so distracted? But it's also about looking at that behavioral change and saying, as employers, what's our role in it? Because yeah, of course it resides with me to manage my distractions as best as I can, or to manage my resilience. But actually, what are the things to, and this is where Criona's company leans in, that an organization can do as well, right? Because if I'm in a crappy environment, or I have terrible leadership, or I don't have the tools, or they don't work, or whatever it is, the reality is like it's an uphill battle. So it's that ownership that Ilse talked about on both sides So I think as employers, what brings about behavioral change and what can I actually do as part of that?
Oh, thanks, Michelle. And just on that, do you think it's important that within an organization, the whole notion of well-being becomes embedded in the organizational culture? And do you too often do you see it just tagged on to the side, and people are expected to? Sorry.
The barnacle,
Yeah,
the well-being
exactly.
barnacle.
I mean, do you think that's one of the big challenges that organizations are facing, to build it into the organizational culture and lead from the top?
Yeah, I mean, look, it is, and you know, if I stand back objectively, right, it is the challenge that any of these kind of quote unquote initiatives, whether it's D&I, whether it's well-being this month, whether it's equality, whatever it is the ongoing challenge, right? And I think part of the problem that when we talk about culture is it seems too big, right? We're like, oh, it has to be part of our values, and now, you know, like actually what I think about is it just needs to be in the flow of work. It just needs to be into what I do or what we as teams do day to day. And if I be honest, this is not me taking away from, there needs to be strategic ownership and investment and strategy and all that. It's not to take away from that, but it is to get it down to a granular level of actually letting teams on the local level and individuals own it, allowing for personalization, bringing it into actually how people work and what it means to their world day to day, rather than it just being some big initiative that a CEO or some C-suite leader like myself comes in and talks about how important it is, and then everybody just goes back to work. And I'm sure, Criona, you have the same experience on your side of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, there's an onus there, certainly, for employers under the law, and a responsibility to make sure that your colleagues are well. And I think more and more companies are kind of understanding that now. There was a lack of knowledge around that. And I suppose as the insurance companies came out and said, you've got to do something about this from an employer liability point of view, more companies are taking note of it, which is brilliant. It's unfortunate that it had to get to there, I suppose. But there are two sides of it. There's two reasons why people would talk to us, for example. There's the compliance piece, but there's also the genuine concern about their colleagues and the employees who are going to come back into the workplace, albeit in a hybrid fashion going forward. They're not the same people who left. They really aren't. There's a higher expectation there, and there are concerns that weren't even a thing before. So employers really need to wrap their heads around this to do best by their colleagues. You know, I think, Michelle, I think you probably agree with that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, when you look at, say, like the likes of Gallup, like, you know, when you look at the employment and get the engagement rates, and I know that might sound like, oh, we're here to talk about well-being, but like this is just a facet of it. Is like, you know, like in 2020, it was standing at about 20%, you know, globally. And when you kind of think about, oh, is that the pandemic? Well, actually, it was 19% in 2018 and 22% in 2019. So I don't know, like, I'm not sure. I know what you're saying, and I agree that people have come back with a new resolve about what they will and won't accept. But if I be honest, I think the problem has always existed, which is like this kind of lack of humanity in how we work and in our workplaces. And I think exactly to your point, Criona, the pandemic has just pushed it forward, and people are now really clear. Like, you look at, say, like the Future Work Institute and the research they've done globally around where employees are at, and you've about 40% saying next year, I'm considering leaving my employer. People are literally voting with their feet, and that kind of goes back to Ilse's point about like what matters overall in our well-being, overall in what makes us happy in life. And I think it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Criona, could I just pick up on something you were touching on there that flows from that over the last 18 months, as people have been obliged to work from home, it's kind of raised the question about where to draw the line between the corporate responsibility for the well-being and the working environment of their employees and the individuals. And in your experience, Criona, do you find that organizations still haven't quite understood where their responsibility starts and stops?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say there's less of an ability to say that you didn't understand now, because the narrative is there very much. But I suppose, where does the responsibility begin and end? Your employee shouldn't have to know how to set up an office space. They're experts in whatever they do, in what they deliver. So you've got to engage with them. You've got to give them a bit of training. You've got to find out if there is an issue. Like in the last year, we've seen people working in their bedroom and getting up in the morning, having a bit of breakfast and going back to the same bed that they slept in all night. Especially younger people in a house sharing situation. Then they watch a bit of TV, they have a bit of dinner, and they go back to the same room again. Now that's a sentence, that's a prison cell. So for an employer to kind of just turn their face away from that, and they're doing these calls, you can see when someone's sitting on a bed. You have to, from a moral point of view, as well from a liability point of view, you've got to engage with that person, and actually you have to engage with all your employees, and you need to find out how they're doing. And it's a lovely touch point. It's a really good way for you to talk to employees on a very human level. But there is a liability there, and we've been pulled into court cases over this as independent experts in this area. So there's that piece, but there's also the piece about making sure that people who maybe are starting their career and don't know what's acceptable, that you look after them and you say, actually, you're not suitable. Come on back into the office.
Yeah, so just picking up on that, we were talking about some of the issues that need to be addressed, and I'd be interested in continuing what you were saying there about communicating with your employees, engaging with them, trying to understand their situation, giving them resources and that. Would you can you think of good examples of well-being in the workplace, or just workplace management initiatives for employee wellness that you've come across in the recent period?
One thing I'd say, just to build on that, and I'm so aligned with Criona on it, is that I think that we have a tendency to think about, like, when we talk a lot about as organizations about high performance, right? And so there's, on one end of the spectrum, there's like compliance, the well-being piece and compliance. And then there's like, we get to the middle, and then maybe it's like around ethics and what's right. And then there's like really advanced organizations who look and they go, this gives me competitive advantage. This drives innovation. This drives creativity, and so appreciating that we've like lots of organizations at different points of the spectrum, and all need to be on it somewhere. And I think one of the challenges is that we tend to think about, when we think about well-being, and I'm sorry, I promise this leads into the answer, which is like, we tend to think about like individual well-being. So like, if I think about, like, say I'm at home, I'm Michelle, I'm eating well, I'm sleeping well, I've loved my life, I can pay my bills, like, I don't know, I'm ultra marathon running while drinking a kale smoothie, right? So I'm in great shape, and I come to work, like, there is a limitation. If the workplace I go to, if I have crap leadership, poor goals, poor objectives, tools that aren't fit for purpose, like, there's a limitation on how well I can perform, and I can never high perform in that environment. Now, conversely, if I'm in an amazing environment and I have all the tools and great leadership and all that stuff, but I'm at home and I'm thinking like crap and sleeping like crap and eating like crap, again, I can never achieve high performance. And the greatest opportunity with well-being, right, is for the marriage of both. And the funny thing is like, when we deal with organizations and everybody's obsessed with high performance, they think it's like really big things, right? It's like, we have to get everybody to be this kale running smoothie ultra marathon person, right? But actually, there's just such a potential to take people in the middle and just move them slightly along while moving the organization along. It's like that 1%. Like, it just takes an organization to exponential places. So when you say that, so sorry, to answer your question then about like, when do you see really good well-being? It's not like I'm not going to say there's any holy grail of company that are doing it perfectly. And I come from real high-end tech where there's tons of money. Like, listen, ILSA knows this. Google, Twitter, Blizzard, same problems everywhere, right? Like, dressed up differently, but like, anywhere there's human beings, the same challenges. So I would never want people to sit in the call thinking, I'm in a small company and I don't have the same budget as Google or Twitter. Like, honestly, there's something everybody can do. And I know Criona would attest to that. But I think, like, if I think about the places where I see it working well, like I think about, say, like a client like ours, like AIB, and I'm not talking about anything, sorry, that we have like lots of case studies on it. But like, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think they do a really super job. Like, they have senior buy-in, they have a chief wellbeing officer, they have a really clear strategy. you know, again, there's ways to break that down, even if you're in a 50-person company, right? They know what they're trying to get from it. They have it linked to goals. Like every one of their managers has a KPI around well-being of their team. So suddenly now it gets into the day-to-day, right? Into the flow of work. They have their local champions in their teams. They have a broad-based program. Like they work with us. So they've got all the program, they've their analytics, all that stuff. And it's activated, like it's lived every day. So it's this bit about like, rather than us talking about culture and all those things, which it is part of the culture, but it's like, let's just get real practical. How do we bring it alive day to day? And finally, then one of the things that I see a lot of our clients anyway, when they do it well, is they link it to like either something like a digital transformation strategy, a culture change strategy, ways of working, like, you know, for example, the hybrid piece or remote or whatever, because when it's included in a bigger initiative, it immediately becomes more connected to what matters to the organization. And I think that's one of the things, like there just has to be an imperative for the business, because I think when it sits in the realm of nice to have, and like we had this as HR people, we had this 10 years ago when we would talk about diversity and inclusion, right? No different than when you see the Anchorman sketch when they're talking about like, is it a great big wooden ship and nobody really understands it? We should just have it. Like it moves it now into something we need to have, and it fits with the bigger initiatives and it makes sense. And I think that's when, I think when it really, really comes to life, when it is at its best.
Great. Thanks a million for that, Michelle. But maybe just picking up on that, just we have a question in the chat from Orla Kane in relation to, you know, good initiatives are great, but what about keeping up engagement of employees? Any tips on that? Maybe yourself, Michelle, I
think the key is, to be honest, is just to get it away from initiatives. Like I get the idea of like, we need something to hang our hat on, like we might need a program, or we might need to call it something, and we need to PR it, but like get it away from initiatives. Because there's just so much effort. Like I know as a HR person, like there's so much effort to get it going, and then it's like, I have to keep it going, and it's exhausting. And then when you stop it, it all dies, right? I would rather have something small, but that actually lived and died, like that lived and breathed in teams, if you know what I mean, or died in that way. And that happened, and it was smaller, and it happened more consistently. Again, it's behavior change, right? Because I think that it's great to have like a big thing that's global and corporate and all that, and it has like a tagline and it has a logo, and that's all fabulous. But like actually where you really want to try get to is actually more personalization. Can my team, like if we all worked for ILSA, you know, do we know what that means to us as a team? And can we just get off and do our things and take action around it? Or are we all sitting for Frank in corporate HQ to kick off the initiative, tell us when we're halfway, communicate the outcomes? Like, I think that's, sorry, and maybe that's not helpful to that question. I might reflect on it a bit more, but I think that it's try to get away from initiatives and try to bring things in. Like even, for example, something as like, you know, if there's something that happens already, like a team meeting once a month, hang it on that. Get it into the flow of work, into what we do, rather than another thing. Because I think that like in a world where we are rife with distraction and over too many things to be doing, like less is more. We've a better chance of keeping it up.
I think as well, Michelle, that it's important to get the people involved who really have the need for it, who are really enthusiastic about these things, because those are the ones that last, right? If it fulfills a need, if it's something people are enthusiastic about, it'll last. Because like my experience in Google was, there was a huge focus on well-being a few years ago, and then big initiatives and but really the kind of things that stayed when the priority moved to other things like inclusion or DEI, those kind of grassroots initiatives really kind of stood the test of time and are still happening and are really bringing a lot of benefit to a lot of people.
The running club, the knitting club, the whatever. Yeah, of course. And I mean, the other thing I will say is, and I know this, and Ilse, you probably know this, is like, do not have people that are too into well-being design your well-being program.
No.
Honestly, it is the absolute road to ruination. Like if you've someone that's like, come on, let's get everybody ultra marathon running, like, God, no one wants to do
or
that.
have a monk guide your meditation, which we did, yes.
Yeah. Try find middle of the road people.
First of all, thanks to ILSA for a really interesting presentation on the subject, and particularly to Criona and Michelle for participating in the panel discussion. Really great to have you guys on board today. Now, our next event coming up in the calendar is going to be the Learnovation Summit 2021, which is going to be take place virtually this year, as it did last year, and that's on October the 12th and 13th. The last Link and Learn webinar of the year will take place on the 25th of November. We'll be sending out further information on the topic closer to the time. So thank you again for attending today's event, and we look forward to seeing you at one of our Learnovate events in the future. Thanks very much.